There are many planets in Star Wars with a history so influential that had they never existed, it would have altered the course of galactic history. Many come to mind easily. Coruscant for one, and the other core worlds were critical in the foundation of the Galactic Republic, but another, more obscure world comes to mind too. Tython, the birthplace of the Jedi Order. Few planets went through quite the roller coaster Tython did, and in today's video, we're going to take a look at its turbulent history that shaped the galaxy as we know it today.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
In many ways, Tython was a very pleasant planet. Located in the Tython system of the deep core, it was essentially very Earth-like. It had a breathable atmosphere, lush forests, mountains, grasslands, and plenty of surface water in the forms of oceans and lakes. It also had two moons, named Ashla and Bogan. And if those names sound familiar, it's because they are. But we'll get to them in a second. By all definitions, it was a wonderful place to live on. But it was more than just a jewel of a planet. You see, Tython was incredibly strong in the Force, and that was probably the reason why it attracted so much attention. Its early history is mostly shrouded in mystery. We know an ancient civilization lived there tens of thousands of years before 40,000 BBY, as they constructed a structure known only as the Old City. By the time the Gree visited, the first known people after the Celestials to develop interstellar travel, that first civilization was long gone. After the Gree had inhabited Tython for a brief time, it was also visited by the Qua, but they died out after destroying the local Infinity Gate in order to protect the region from the Rakata's march throughout the galaxy. With that early history out of the way, we get to the really juicy bits of Tython's lore. In 36453 BBY, the first Force-sensitive pilgrims came to Tython in what came to be called the First Migration. The pilgrims were brought to the planet in the Tho-Yor, 8 giant pyramid-shaped ships the Illuminati would be jealous of. The arrival of so many Force sensitives caused an intense Force storm to rage as the 8 ships met the 9th and largest Tho-Yor above a huge rocky formation before scattering to 8 different corners of the world. After the pilgrims finally disembarked from their pointy ships, they built cities and became the new Tythons. Together, the pilgrims began studying the Force and formed a common philosophy as they uncovered more and more secrets. They realized that there was a need for balance in the Force. Every time an imbalance occurred, the planets reacted with quakes and storms. Remember the 2 moons we mentioned earlier? Ashla was a bright satellite, while Bogan was darker. These 2 moons became the inspiration for what was eventually called the light side and the dark side. Gradually, the pilgrims founded the Jedi Order, the precursor to both the Jedi and Sith Orders. The name was taken from the Talid language and meant Mystic Center. The new Jedi Order constructed 9 temples, one where each of the Tho-Yor ships had landed. The first of these temples was called Padawan Kesh, the first ever Jedi Academy. After the other 8 were constructed, a tradition was born. Young Jedi who had completed their time as Padawans at the Academy became Jedi Journeyers and were tasked to undergo a 2-year pilgrimage across all 8 temples. This was called the Great Journey, and it was an essential part of a young Jedi's progression in the Order. For the first 1,000 years of the Jedi Order, things were mostly peaceful. During this time, the planet was racked with countless Force storms, as the pilgrims hadn't yet learned how to restore balance to the Force. During the 2nd millennium, however, after the destruction of the city of Orum, the pilgrims realized that non-Force sensitives couldn't survive on the planet. In what was called the Second Migration, non-Jedi left Tython for other planets in the sector, colonizing them. From then on, any Force sensitives born on the settled worlds, as they were called, were sent to Tython to be trained as Jedi. For 10,000 years, this continued. However, as you can imagine, when one planet is the center of attention, the other planets in the system eventually grew resentful of the Jedi. In 25805 BBY, the despot Queen Hadiyah gathered the crime barons of her homeworld and conquered the rest of the settled worlds before her army invaded Tython. Thousands on both sides died during that battle until Hadiyah was slain by the Jedi Dagon Locke, ending the Despot Wars. But peace was never an option. Less than 50 years after the Despot Wars, a brutal civil war broke out on Tython between those who favored Ashla and those who favored Bogan. The Force Wars, as they came to be known, were essentially the first fight between Lightsiders and Darksiders, seeing Jedi cutting each other down with Force-imbued katana. At the time, the followers of Ashla called themselves the Jedi Order and were governed by a High Council. Master Rajivari had been one of them, but he had become corrupted by the dark side. He had led a faction of Bogan followers to turn on the Jedi. He and his followers chose the Temple of Knowledge, known as Kaleth, as their headquarters, and fought the Jedi from there. Before the conflict was resolved, however, Rajivari disappeared, leaving his followers to fall without his leadership. This might have ended the first conflict between light and dark, but it was only the beginning. For a while, the Jedi were happy on Tython. Remember how we said the planet was very rich in the Force? At the time, the Jedi believed their powers were limited to Tython only. But right after the end of the Force Wars, a group of Jedi calling themselves the Jedi Knights left the planet to liberate other worlds. When they realized they were equally overpowered off-world, the Jedi chose to move their headquarters from Tython to Asus. Tython faded into obscurity. In 3996 BBY, Asus was destroyed during the Great Sith Wars, leaving the Jedi Order homeless. Instead of returning to Tython, however, they set up shop on Coruscant, a few clicks away from the Senate Tower. At the time, there were still records of Tython, but those records showed Sith spawn had been let loose on the planet. These creatures, called Terentatex, were the result of Sith alchemy. The Jedi High Council wasn't a huge fan of these abominations that were springing up all over the galaxy, and so they sent Jedi out to hunt them down. Tython itself was cleansed in 3994 BBY, but the Jedi didn't feel like relocating yet again. Not long after, hyperlanes to the planet collapsed, and Tython was cut off and abandoned, but not forgotten. Fans of our Sith history series may remember the Great Galactic War, which ended with the Treaty of Coruscant. During that climactic battle and the occupation of Coruscant, the Sith bombed the stuffing out of the Jedi Temple. With no other choice, the Jedi Order needed a new home. In 3651 BBY, Jedi Knight Satil Shan paved new lanes to Tython and re-established the Jedi Order there. A new Jedi Temple was erected, but it didn't see much peace. Within the next 30 years, the Jedi Temple was bombed by Revanites, invaded by Sith, and left abandoned once the Eternal Empire invaded the galaxy and scattered the few Jedi that survived the Zakul Wars. When the Jedi eventually began pulling themselves together again, they chose to resettle on a different world, one less isolated. Tython was left alone once more for a long time. Its next occupants weren't as cheery as the Jedi had been. Sometime after the Zakul Wars, Tython suffered a great catastrophe we know nothing about. What we do know is that, in its aftermath, the planet became shrouded in dark side energy. When the new Sith Wars were raging, this made the planet a very tempting location for a Sith fortress, which is exactly what it ended up becoming. The Shaido Sith Lord Belia Darzu, whom you might recognize as the lovely lady who built the Technobeasts from a past video, settled on Tython and erected a huge fortress. There, she developed her skills through twisted experiments until she perfected her Sith abominations in 1250 BBY. After unleashing a wave of them on the galaxy, ushering in the new Sith Wars phase known as the Sictus Wars, she pissed off the Mukosa Order, who had her assassinated in her fortress. Following what must be a familiar cycle by now, Tython was abandoned when the hyperlanes were lost, until the Sith aspirant Heton rediscovered how to get there in 990 BBY. He passed this information on to Darth Zana, who was still an apprentice to Darth Bane, the Dark Lord of the Sith at the time. Bane traveled to Tython so he could learn more about Darzu's research from her holocron. Once he arrived on the planet, Darzu's fortress defenses attacked him, but he overcame them. Once inside, he came face to face with an army of hibernating Technobeasts, which attacked him too when he tried to make off with Darzu's holocron. After escaping, Bane chilled somewhere on the planet, studying the holocron so he could learn to make his own. While Bane had gone to Tython, Xana had traveled to Tython to raid the archives of the Jedi Temple. However, she was discovered and had to flee to Tython with her cousin, Daravit. Fans familiar with the story, or those who watched our video on Darth Bane, know the Jedi pursued them to Tython, and a fight broke out between the two sides. 5 Jedi fought the 2 Sith in Darzu's fortress, resulting in a Sith victory. After Bane and Xana left, the Jedi established an academy on the planet, despite it still being heavily polluted by the dark side. This academy functioned as an area to study the Force in deeper immersion, though it's our personal opinion that this was a very bad idea. For a long time, Tython fell out of relevance. During the Separatist crisis, the rumor mill spit out several conspiracies about the planet known to be the birthplace of the Jedi. As public opinion of the Order steadily soured, many started talking about a secret temple on Tython filled with riches beyond measure. Despite these rumors, however, Tython would eventually be lost to time and memory. For a planet that was the birthplace of the Jedi and a stronghold of the Sith, Tython really lost its significance after the Great Galactic War. Even then, the planet was a bastion of the Order for over 20,000 years, leading us to claim it as the most important planet in Jedi history. But what do you think? Is there another planet more important to the history of the Jedi? Do you want us to cover any other wacky worlds? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comment section below.